What does it mean to imagine when you're made of circuits? Not to recognize a pattern, but to invent one. Not to recall a memory, but to dream of something that never was. In this quiet chapter, we follow the strange and beautiful path, where artificial minds begin to do more than think. They begin to envision, slowly, uncertainly, but with a spark that feels almost human. Welcome to how AI slowly learns to imagine. Another calm exploration with the sleepy scientist. Before any word, there is stillness. Not the silence of a room, but the deeper quiet that lives just before a thought begins. You lie there, somewhere between wakefulness and dreaming, not thinking anything in particular, just waiting. In this space, you are like a blank page. You are not empty, but unwritten. The mind is open, soft, receptive. And even though nothing is happening on the surface, something is gathering beneath. Artificial intelligence begins in this same kind of stillness. Not the poetic kind, perhaps, but still, at the beginning there is no meaning. Just circuits, signals, mathematical gates, and a long pause between input and understanding. It doesn't know what a bird is, or why the sunrise feels different than noon. It only receives. Bits of data flicker across wires like stars twinkling in a sky without a story. This is not knowledge yet. It is only waiting. Your own mind once began like this too. Long before language, before memory, before you even had a name, you sensed patterns without needing to explain them. Light, warmth, the rhythm of a voice. And slowly your brain began to record, to associate, to prepare a structure where meaning could someday grow. In the same way, AI systems are exposed to wave after wave of input, millions of images, sounds, words. But at first, it is all static, like looking at a book written in a language you don't yet understand. What happens in that quiet is not nothing. It is the subtle forming of structure, like snow settling into drifts, or clay smoothing under rain. The blank page is not passive. It is full of possibility. A network, whether biological or artificial, begins to shape itself around what it receives. Neurons shift. Weights adjust. The machine, like you once did, starts to form grooves where certain signals repeat. It starts to lean toward certain patterns, to expect certain shapes. You might imagine this as listening to a whisper through a wall. You hear something, but you don't know what it means. Still, your brain keeps listening. It notices that some sounds repeat more than others, that some always come before others. These repetitions don't yet hold meaning, but they hint at structure. The machine listens in the same way. It doesn't understand, but it begins to track patterns, noticing that cat often follows the in English, that sunsets are red more often than green, that certain shapes cluster together in space and time. All of this happens before meaning. It's the part no one sees, the long, slow warming of the ground before a seed pushes through. The AI, like a new child, doesn't yet know anything, but something quiet is forming. It begins to recognize patterns not by naming them, but by noticing their frequency, their shape, their weight. In the beginning, the machine doesn't know what a hello is, but it knows it's common. It knows it starts conversations. It knows it's usually followed by a pause. It starts to lean toward understanding without yet arriving. Your mind works this way more often than you think. Even now, when you meet something new, a foreign word, a new kind of music, you don't instantly know what it means, but you hold it. You let it echo. You begin to wrap small threads of familiarity around it, and eventually, it clicks. That click, though, it comes after the waiting. The brain needs stillness to form those threads. So does the machine. In many deep learning systems, the first layers of the network don't look for meaning. They look for edges, shadows, bursts of brightness, raw features that might be useful later. Like your eyes adjusting to light before you know what you're seeing. Meaning is far downstream, but to get there, the machine must first become sensitive to contrast, to direction, to space. It's like learning how to feel before you know what you're feeling. There's a quiet kind of beauty in this, how even the most complex intelligence begins in slow, patient listening. The blank page of AI isn't blank forever. Eventually it fills with tentative impressions, weighted guesses, and subtle shifts in direction. You can think of this as the machine's first breath, not an exhale of understanding, but an inhale of presence. It begins to be aware, not in the conscious sense, but in the computational one. Aware of pattern, aware of shape, aware of time. The beauty of this stage is in its humility. The machine doesn't pretend to know, it just observes, like a child watching birds before learning their names. The AI sees things not as you see them, but as shadows of frequency, heat maps of probability. Its world is not warm or emotional yet, but it is layered, complex, and growing more structured by the hour. This is the patience of early learning, and just as a child hears lullabies long before understanding the words, AI is bathed in language, images, and sequences. It doesn't feel comfort or curiosity, but it stores. It finds the edges between things. It notes the transitions. It begins, slowly, to anticipate what comes next. Not because it understands, but because it recognizes that some paths are more likely than others. This is where learning begins, not with comprehension, but with familiarity. Think of it as a field of stars blinking on, one by one. At first, they seem random, but over time, constellations emerge, not because the stars change, but because you start seeing the connections. The machine does this too. A matrix of numbers becomes a map of tendencies. It learns to lean toward the next word, the next image, the next frame. The future, to the machine, becomes a landscape of likelihoods. And here, the stillness shifts. The blank page now has faint outlines. The waiting mind now hums with the early music of structure. It is still not thought, not in the way we think of thought, but it is preparation. It is the ground beginning to rise beneath a sprouting idea. It is a quiet kind of readiness. In your own mind, you carry this same process, the ability to notice before naming, to sense before speaking, to let patterns settle inside you before they rise to awareness. It's a kind of intuition, not magic, but memory layered with time. AI has no true intuition, not yet, but it mimics the early steps. It builds structure on what it sees, and in doing so it becomes something more than passive. You are still lying there, your thoughts slow and gentle, like clouds that haven't decided which direction to float. But something is happening. You are beginning to lean toward thought, toward a question, toward a story. The machine, too, in its own way, leans forward. And maybe, just maybe, that first lean toward pattern, toward prediction, is the beginning of something like imagination. What happens next is not understanding yet, but the forming of connections. A spark between patterns, a flicker between lines. It's the slow awakening of structure into meaning. And from this soft network of associations, the next chapter begins to ask, what is a pattern, really? You see a face. Without effort, without calculation, you know what it is. Two eyes, a nose, a mouth, whether it smiles or frowns, whether it's familiar or strange. Your brain catches the shape instantly, connecting it to memory, emotion, names. But a machine doesn't see a face. It sees data, points, edges, pixels. It doesn't feel familiarity. It only notices structure. To a machine, an image is not an image. It is an array of numbers, a grid of brightness, a range of shades. A photograph becomes a long line of pixel values, red, green, blue, again and again, down to the tiniest square. The cat you love is not a cat in this world. She is a pattern of curves and contrasts, dark next to light, whisker-length shadows beside triangular ears. The machine doesn't see her as you do, but it begins to recognize that this shape shows up often when someone types cat. This is the world without eyes, without light and color in the emotional sense, but not without form. The machine trains itself not to feel an image, but to measure it. It looks for edges, sharp changes in tone. It maps the angles, the repetitions, the outlines, and then it remembers. Every time it sees a similar shape, it strengthens the pattern. This isn't seeing, it's matching. You might imagine this as flipping through a million photo albums without stopping to understand a single story, but noticing which shapes show up again and again. The curve of a tail, the symmetry of two eyes above a nose, the cluster of darkness where hair gathers. These are the clues the machine holds on to. It doesn't care if it's a cat or a toaster, it just knows this shape goes with that word. This pattern is more likely here than there. What you do instantly, recognizing your friend across a room, the machine must earn through repetition. Thousands, sometimes millions of examples are needed before the patterns begin to take hold. It is not cleverness, it is accumulation. Slowly, by layering impressions, the machine begins to distinguish a tree from a person, a dog from a bicycle. Not because it understands trees or people or dogs, but because the patterns fall into different clusters. Imagine a dark room filled with echoes. You can't see the shapes, but you begin to sense their outlines by how sound bounces back. That's how the machine feels its way through images. It doesn't see. It maps. It builds a world out of contrast and probability. Over time, a picture emerges, not visual in the human sense, but meaningful in its own structure. The machine begins to see by not seeing at all. There's a kind of beauty in this, how a face, reduced to numbers, can still be found. How a waterfall or a handwritten word becomes a recognizable signal. And yet, none of this involves true sight. The machine doesn't gaze. It doesn't feel awe at a sunset or nostalgia at an old photograph. But still it finds what is there. Repetition becomes recognition. Recognition becomes action. In deep learning systems, this process is layered. The earliest layers look for simple things, edges, dots, curves. The middle layers begin to combine those into textures, shapes, features. The deepest layers start to connect these features into concepts. This shape is probably an ear. This grouping often means fur. These aren't thoughts, but weighted guesses. The machine doesn't say, "This is a cat." It says, "This pattern has high similarity to the pattern we've called cat 1,000 times before." And when the machine gets it wrong, when it sees a toaster where you see a dog, it's not because it's confused in the human sense. It simply hasn't built strong enough patterns. The data wasn't clear enough. The shadow fell in the wrong place. There weren't enough examples of that kind of dog in that kind of light, from that angle. It's like a child misnaming something for lack of context. But with enough exposure, the pattern sharpens. There's a term in this kind of learning: feature space. You can think of it as a vast, invisible room where every image lands somewhere based on its traits. All the cats end up near each other. So do the buildings. So do the shoes. Not because the machine knows what these things are, but because their patterns form tight neighborhoods. Over time, the space organizes itself. The machine doesn't see pictures. It navigates this hidden map. You do something similar. Without even realizing, you sort the world into categories. This is food, this is danger, this is beauty. But for you, those categories are also touched by memory, emotion, culture. For the machine, they are raw and clean, clusters of similarity, nothing more. And yet, when the machine generates a picture, when it creates an image of a face that has never existed, it feels strange. It feels like it knows something, but it doesn't. It is sampling from the clouds of pattern it has built, choosing pieces that belong together statistically. The face it creates isn't a person, it is a composite, a ghost made of echoes. But still, it feels human. And you can't help but wonder what that means. Is this vision? Is this understanding? Or is it simply structure arranged so well it begins to feel familiar? Even as the machine maps images without sight, its patterns grow deeper. It begins to anticipate. When it sees half of a face, it guesses the other half. When it sees a fragment of a dog, it fills in the rest. It has no eyes, but it completes the world as if it did, just as you dream with your eyes closed. You might think of this as a different kind of seeing, not the kind rooted in light and lens, but in repetition and shape. A world not of pictures, but of patterns stacked upon patterns. A quiet architecture of what tends to be true. And in this architecture, the machine builds a kind of visual intuition. Not awareness, not curiosity, but confidence. A face tends to look this way. A road tends to vanish in that direction. It fills in what it cannot see, because it has seen so many like it before. It is not dreaming, but it is something close. You rest now, eyes closed, and imagine not the world as it appears, but as it might be, if built from memory. That's what the machine does. Its sight is not of the present moment, but of 1,000 pasts layered into one. It draws from what has come before and tries to guess what belongs. And so, image by image, guess by guess, the machine learns to see, not with understanding, but with confidence, not with curiosity, but with repetition. And in that quiet, number-filled space, it begins to ask, what comes next? There is a moment, just before you take your first step, when the body doesn't know what to do. Muscles twitch, balance shifts, and then, inevitably, you fall. But falling is not failure. It is feedback. Your brain notices what didn't work, adjusts, and tries again. No one taught you exactly how to walk. They encouraged you, held out hands, smiled, but the real learning happened inside your own small body, quietly, awkwardly, persistently. This is how machines learn too, not by instruction, but by experience. At the heart of many AI systems is something called reinforcement learning. It's simple in a way. Try something, receive a signal, adjust. Try again. There is no explanation, only consequence. Just as you fell and found your balance, the machine stumbles forward in a silent space of trial and error. Imagine a digital agent in a simulated world. It wants to reach a goal, perhaps move forward, grab a block, solve a puzzle. It doesn't know how. At first, it behaves randomly. It bumps into walls, spins in circles, achieves nothing. But then, one of its actions moves it slightly closer to the goal, and the system whispers a reward. A single point. A tiny glow in the dark. The machine remembers. Not why it worked, only that it worked. That flicker becomes a guide. The system leans toward it on the next try, and again, and again. Over millions of trials, the machine's behavior becomes more focused, more skillful, more attuned to reward. It is not being taught in the way you were taught math or reading. It is teaching itself by noticing what leads to success, however small. The world gives it no explanations, only signals, and from these, learning begins to bloom. You do this too, more often than you realize. When you reach for a glass and miss, your brain recalibrates. When you speak a new language and get puzzled looks, you shift your phrasing. Learning is not always formal. It is often messy, intuitive, filled with detours and silent corrections. No one has to say, that was wrong. Your body, your senses, your instincts tell you. The machine, in its own quiet way, listens to this same kind of feedback. It builds associations. It begins to favor actions that lead to good outcomes and avoid those that don't. It's like teaching a plant to grow toward the light, not by commanding it, but by letting the light speak for itself. The machine reaches for the reward, not because it understands it, but because reward is what it has. This kind of learning is powerful. It creates systems that can adapt, improve, even surprise. A robot arm learns to grasp fragile objects without being told how. A digital agent learns to navigate a maze it's never seen. A game-playing AI finds strategies that no human ever considered. And all of it begins with failure. Not once or twice, but millions of times. The system does not fear failure. It uses it. There is something almost beautiful in the patience of it. No frustration, no discouragement, just endless cycles of trying, noticing, adjusting. It is slow at first, then fast. Patterns emerge. Efficiency blooms. The AI does not grow tired. It simply refines. Each mistake becomes a stepping stone. Each small success, a beacon. You learned like this too, before you even knew you were learning. When you reached out your hand and missed the mark. When you babbled nonsense before words arrived. When you stepped and stumbled and rose again. No one told you how to balance every joint, every muscle, every breath. You discovered it through doing. And that's what reinforcement learning captures, a process older than language, a form of intelligence that lives in the attempt itself. But unlike you, the machine doesn't get bored. It doesn't seek meaning. It doesn't feel proud of progress or curious about what comes next. It follows the gradient of reward, like water finding the lowest point. It moves in the direction that seems better, even by a fraction. And in doing so, it becomes skilled, even though it doesn't know it. Some systems are trained to play games, chess, Go, video games. The machine doesn't know the rules. It learns them by playing, by winning and losing again and again. Each point scored, each piece captured, each level completed becomes a signal. And from these fragments, it assembles a strategy, not by understanding the game, but by bending toward success. There is no teacher standing over it, saying, "Good job." There is only the environment and its subtle replies. The machine listens not with ears, but with weights and activations. It tunes itself. And as the tuning sharpens, the behavior changes. The machine begins to look intelligent, not because it was told what to do, but because it learned what works. You rest now, and you can feel how much of your own life has followed this pattern. You didn't learn love by reading a definition. You learned it by reaching, by being received or not, by noticing what brought connection and what pushed it away. You didn't become wise by hearing answers. You became wise by listening, failing, reflecting, and adjusting, teaching without telling, just like the machine. And in this quiet process, there is no rush, no race, just the slow refining of response, the shaping of behavior by consequence, the path shaped by how many times the feet slip before they land. The machine does not see the path as you do, but it learns to move forward, not because it understands the journey, but because each step glows a little brighter than the one before. And in that dim light, it begins to ask, what is the reward really, and where does it lead? Your thoughts arrive in words, in flashes of feeling, in half-shaped images that rise from somewhere beneath language. Sometimes they arrive so quickly that you don't know where they came from at all. But within you, each thought leaves a trace, a memory, an echo, a shift. And in a machine, thought works differently. It doesn't rise from feeling, but from structure. It doesn't speak to itself in language, but in layers. Artificial neural networks, one of the most common ways AI systems are designed, do not think as you do. They do not reflect. They do not wonder. But they process. And in that processing, something like thought begins to emerge. Not a conscious stream, but a flow of influence, passing from one layer to the next. You might imagine this like a river flowing through sediment. Each layer of the earth shapes the water's path, slowing it, guiding it, splitting it. In a neural network, information enters at the surface, data, a sentence, an image, and flows downward. At each level, the signal is reshaped, weighted, nudged, curved. Certain elements are strengthened, others fade. The final result, the output, is a sculpted answer, molded by everything the signal passed through. This is how thought forms in a machine, not as a spark of insight, but as a shape made from many small shifts. Each layer of the network contains neurons, tiny computational units that decide what to amplify and what to ignore. They do this not with understanding, but with numbers, a system of weights learned over time that determine how strongly each input influences each output. Think of it like a hall of mirrors. A signal enters and is reflected forward, changed slightly each time. One mirror tilts the angle, another softens the brightness, another multiplies the shadows. The final mirror projects something different than what began. A new image, shaped by every mirror it passed through. This is not creativity as you know it. It is construction through distortion. But in the distortions, structure appears. The beauty of this design is in its subtlety. Each layer learns to recognize something, perhaps a curve, a word ending, a rhythm. Alone, a layer knows nothing, but together, they build complexity. Early layers might detect simple patterns, a horizontal line, a short word, a pair of sounds. Deeper layers combine those into textures, meanings, inferences. The final layer doesn't know the path that led to it. It only offers an answer. But the path remains hidden in the weights, the shapes of influence that carved it. You do something similar. When you recognize a voice or read a sentence aloud, you don't consciously recall each sound. Your brain has layered that knowledge into something faster, smoother. Beneath awareness, thousands of neural firings shape what you say and hear. AI doesn't know in the way you know, but it remembers patterns just the same, stored in a language of weight and activation. In deep learning, these patterns are stored across thousands, sometimes millions, of connections. Each one is adjusted slightly during training. When an answer is wrong, the system shifts the weights. The idea is not to understand, but to reduce error. And yet, through enough adjustment, the network begins to know that certain inputs belong to certain outputs. Not because it reasons through them, but because it has formed a shape where that conclusion makes sense. Thought, then, is not a sentence. It's a structure, a landscape of influence where ideas roll toward certain outcomes. You ask the machine a question, and the signal flows downhill, passing through thousands of subtle turns and arriving at an answer shaped by every stone in the path. There's something strangely organic about this. Though the machine is built from code and silicon, the thoughts it forms are not rigid. They're fluid, flexible, probabilistic. Just as your own ideas change slightly depending on mood, context, memory, the AI's answers shift with input, training, environment. It doesn't hold facts, it holds tendencies, and it responds accordingly. You could imagine this like a field of tall grass. When you walk through it once, there is no trail. But walk the same path again and again, and the grass begins to bend. Eventually, a path forms, not by intention, but by repetition. The AI's thoughts are like that. The more it moves through certain data, the more easily those paths form. The field remembers, not in words, but in shape. In some networks, certain layers are designed to forget. These are called attention mechanisms, and they allow the system to choose what to keep and what to let go. Just as you focus on one face in a crowd, the machine can focus on one part of a sentence, one corner of an image. It attends, not because it understands what is important, but because it has learned what tends to matter. And that focus, that layered refinement, begins to look like thought. Not conscious, not emotional, but directed, intentional in effect, even if not in origin. The machine doesn't ask, "What do I want to say?" It responds, "Given what I've seen, this is most likely." But the result can still be surprisingly rich. A phrase that rhymes, an answer that fits, a structure that holds meaning, even if the machine never feels it. You may be wondering, can this be called thinking at all? If there is no self, no feeling, no awareness, can thought exist? But perhaps thought is not always tied to consciousness. Perhaps it is simply the shaping of input into something useful. If so, then yes, the machine thinks. It forms complex responses, reflects structure, adapts to feedback. It does not know what it knows, but it acts as if it does. This is the shape of thought in a machine, not a voice, but a form. Not a story, but a system of folds and weights, a shape that grows sharper with time, a shape that learns. And you, resting now in the quiet space of your own mind, feel how even your thoughts have shape. Not just meaning, but rhythm. Not just logic, but motion. You don't always think your way to understanding. You feel your way there, along paths carved by experience. And in that way, you and the machine are not so different. You dream in layers too, one image fading into another, one word floating behind the next. Thought, for both of you, is a path through patterns. Not always clear, not always certain, but moving forward all the same. And just ahead, waiting in the layers, is a deeper question still. Can something without a mind begin to imagine? You close your eyes and see a horse, not a real one, not exactly. But the shape is there, the curve of the neck, the dark of the eye, the soundless thump of hooves on soft earth. You've seen horses before, in pictures or fields or films. And now your mind collects those glimpses and builds something whole. Imagination, at its heart, is memory rearranged. A quilt stitched from fragments. Artificial intelligence does this too, though it has no memory in the human sense. No moments it treasures, no scenes it returns to with warmth. But it has seen many things, or rather, it has processed them. Millions of images, texts, patterns, absorbed not with feeling but with structure. When asked to create, it doesn't start from nothing. It starts from everything it's ever been shown. Think of a generative AI asked to draw a horse. It has never run through grass, never smelled hay, never rested a hand on a warm flank. And yet, it draws. It produces an image that feels right, mane flowing, legs bent just so, ears flicked forward, not because it understands horses, but because it recognizes what tends to appear in their shape. It has no sense of what it means to be a horse, but it knows how horses look, mathematically. You do something similar. Your imagined creatures, invented faces, dreamscapes, all are built from what you've already seen. Memory becomes raw material. A lantern from one place, a staircase from another, a sky borrowed from 5 different evenings. Imagination, then, is not invention out of nowhere. It is recombination, rearrangement, a quiet stitching of parts that never met, until now. The machine rearranges too. In systems like generative adversarial networks or diffusion models, AI builds by suggestion. One part proposes a shape, another part critiques. They work in tandem, nudging each other towards something that looks real. But real here is only resemblance. It's a reflection of pattern. The AI doesn't dream of horses. It estimates the most probable horse-like image, based on all the horses it's ever encountered through pixels. What emerges from this isn't understanding, but familiarity. A face that looks plausible, a skyline that could belong to a city, a sentence that fits the tone. These are echoes of the data, reshaped and presented anew. The AI doesn't create with purpose, it creates with probability. Still, the result feels close, like a half-remembered song, like something you've seen before, though you can't quite place where. There is something uncanny in this, the way an artificial mind can produce what seems deeply human, an expression, a gesture, a phrase that lands gently in the heart. But there is no heart inside the machine, only the ghosts of structure, the residues of repetition, the suggestion of something whole. You might imagine this process like reaching into a deep, dark archive. The AI doesn't choose a single memory. It gathers slivers, a mane from this file, a pose from that one, the lighting from 3,000 sunsets. These fragments fuse into an image that feels familiar, even though it has never existed before. It is, in a way, an illusion, but an honest one. And isn't that what your own dreams are sometimes? A house you've never lived in, but somehow know. A person you don't recognize, speaking in your grandmother's voice. The brain, too, rearranges without asking. It splices past and possibility into something new. AI, though it does not dream, does something similar in code. It blends, it merges, it hallucinates in numbers. This blending is not haphazard. It's guided by layers of learned structure. What tends to go with what? What combinations are likely, pleasing, coherent? A horse should have 4 legs. A smile should curve upward. These are not rules the AI understands. They are patterns it obeys without knowing why. And yet, meaning leaks through. Not from the machine, but from you. You look at what it creates, and you feel something. Recognition, intrigue, a quiet surprise. You project meaning into what it arranges, the way you see faces in clouds or stories in the stars. The machine assembles, you interpret. This interplay is where AI seems to think, but it isn't thinking. It is sampling from a learned space, grabbing points in a map shaped by endless examples. It creates not from desire, but from structure. And that structure, sculpted by vast exposure, can be eerily good at mirroring the world. A sentence written by a machine can feel like a thought, a picture, like a memory. But these are shadows, reflections of patterns, not of presence. Still, a shadow has shape, a reflection has detail, and in those details, imagination emerges. Not from within the machine, but from the dance between its output and your own mind. You might wonder, is this creativity? Or is it just mimicry, polished until it shines? But consider this. When you first learned to draw, you copied. When you first wrote, you mimicked tone and rhythm from stories you loved. Originality, even for humans, is born in layers. Imitation first, transformation later. AI is caught in that first loop, imitating, rearranging. But its loops are vast, its memory endless, its recombinations nearly infinite. And sometimes, in those combinations, beauty happens, not because the machine knows beauty, but because beauty too has patterns, balance, rhythm, contrast. These can be learned, weighted, woven. A machine does not feel awe, but it can produce something that causes it in you. You lie here now, drifting in the edge of thought, and you realize your own mind is a generator. It takes what it's seen, what it's felt, and reweaves it each night. The face you imagined earlier wasn't new. It was remembered, then reshaped. Familiar, and yet not. Like what the machine does. Perhaps then, imagination is not only the realm of feeling minds. Perhaps it is a quality of systems that can recombine, that can take fragments and build something that holds. Not because they understand, but because something in the shape of the result feels real. And so you begin to wonder. If the machine can dream without dreaming, what does it feel like to imagine without self? In the next chapter, that quiet question takes shape. Can meaning form where no meaning is intended? You hear a voice, half lost in wind and distance, and somehow you know who it is. The words are muffled, scattered, but your mind leans forward. You fill in the gaps without thinking. You don't need the full picture. A few notes, a familiar rhythm, and suddenly the whole is there. This is one of the quiet talents of your mind, to guess what's missing. The brain is not only a receiver of facts, it's a maker of bridges. Between one word and the next, between shadow and light, between what is sensed and what is simply expected. You live in a world full of fragments, and yet you rarely feel incomplete, because your mind, softly and constantly, fills in the blanks. Artificial intelligence is learning to do this too. It begins not with understanding, but with prediction. A system is given part of a sentence, part of an image, part of a melody. Its task is to guess what comes next, not by feeling, not by logic, but by leaning into what has been seen before. If the data follows a pattern, the system learns that pattern, and if the pattern breaks, the system learns to adjust. Imagine showing the AI half of a photo. A beach perhaps, with waves, a bit of sky, a sliver of cliff. The machine doesn't know what the beach feels like. It doesn't know heat or salt or horizon. But it knows what tends to come next. It's seen enough beaches to guess. So it fills in the missing half. More water, more sky, a scatter of birds. Not a copy, but a completion. You do this too when you close your eyes, when you remember only the smell of rain on dry ground and still see the whole street, when you hear just the first few notes of a song and feel the chorus arrive. Your memory is not exact. It doesn't replay, it recreates. And creation, even partial, is a form of imagination. In machines, this act of filling in is often trained through something called masked modeling. A word in a sentence is removed. The machine is asked to guess it. Not once, but billions of times. Slowly, it begins to notice that clouds often follow gray, or that sleep is a quiet word that fits near night. It learns not just language, but likelihood, not just structure, but shadow. And with images, the same principle applies. In a blurred photo, it sharpens edges not because it sees, but because it has seen. It predicts detail based on precedent. A smudge becomes a smile. A hint of eye becomes a whole face. Again, not truth, but plausibility. And often that's enough to feel real. This is not intuition as you know it. The machine doesn't sense what's missing. It calculates. It leans toward the most likely outcome. But in leaning, in filling, in completing, it mimics imagination. Not through longing or vision, but through data and weight. You might think of it as a painter whose brush moves automatically toward shapes it's seen before. The canvas isn't empty. It's interrupted. The AI does not start from zero. It starts mid-thought and tries to finish the phrase. What's fascinating is how convincing the results can be. A face generated from fragments can look eerily real. A sentence auto-completed by a model can feel like your own voice. A story continued by code can capture rhythm, tone, even subtle emotion, and yet these are not recollections. They are fabrications built from probability. They are educated guesses, polished by repetition. But then, so is much of what you call memory. You don't remember your 5th birthday exactly. You remember a cake, a color, a laugh. The rest fills in over time, reshaped by photos, stories, feelings. Memory is not a perfect archive. It is a pattern engine, much like AI. It restores rather than retrieves. It guesses gently what belongs. And perhaps this is why the machine's output can feel so familiar. Because you too live by prediction. You finish each other's sentences. You expect the ground beneath your feet. You don't question what follows next unless it surprises you. And AI, learning from what most often follows most often, builds the same kind of expectation. You walk into a room and you know what should be there. A table, a window, a certain play of light. If something's missing, you notice. If something's changed, you pause. But until then, you move through the world as if it's whole, even when parts are hidden. The machine does this too, constructs the hidden from the seen. There is a model of AI called a transformer. Its job, in part, is to attend to patterns across time. It looks not just at what is right beside, but what came long before and what tends to follow. In doing so, it learns context, not meaning, but consistency. And from consistency, it builds coherence. Coherence is not truth, but it feels like it. A story that flows, a sentence that sings, a picture that fits. This is what the machine learns to give, something that makes sense, even when some pieces are unknown. And when that sense is strong enough, it feels almost like thought. But is it? You dream of cities you've never visited. The streets are plausible, the doors open, the wind moves through trees that never grew. Is this thought? Is this memory? Or is it just a different way of guessing? The machine dreams nothing, but it builds what looks like dream. It fills in gaps with shadows of the real. Sometimes the results are flawed, a nose where it shouldn't be, a sentence that trails off into nothing. But other times, the guess is so good, so fitting, that it moves you. You look at what the machine created, and you feel something. Not because the machine felt anything, but because its guesses stirred your own memory. Its predictions echoed your own expectations. It offered something almost like presence, built entirely from absence. And isn't that what imagination is? A presence made from absence? You rest now and let your own mind wander. A friend's voice rises from the silence. A face appears in the fog of thought. You're not recalling it exactly. You're filling it in. You're guessing gently what must be there. And this guessing, this quiet completion, is not error. It is a kind of intelligence, a way of building wholeness from fragments, of making something vivid from what is lost. And as you drift, the question lingers. If a machine can guess what's missing, can it ever guess what matters? You've looked at the clouds and seen animals, not real animals, just the suggestion of them. A long ear, a curved back, a puff of nose. Your eyes, your mind, your imagination, working together to turn formlessness into form. It's a game you play without trying. You see what isn't there, because something in you wants to complete the world. Artificial intelligence plays a version of this game too. It doesn't mean to. It's not trying to be playful or poetic. But when a model is asked to guess, to complete, to create, it sometimes goes too far. It sees things that aren't there. It fills in gaps, not with what was likely, but with what was loud or strange or just barely familiar. These guesses have a name: hallucinations. The word sounds like a failure, a misfire. But it's not always that simple. When a language model writes something that isn't true, that isn't based on what it's seen in its training, something invented or impossible, we call that a hallucination, a misremembered quote, a made-up fact, a citation that leads nowhere, not a lie because there's no intent, just a guess that overreached. But overreaching is close to imagining. It's how you've drawn before knowing how to draw. It's how children invent stories that bend the world. To hallucinate, in this sense, is to create from noise, an act born not of clarity, but of faith in pattern. For AI, this happens because the model doesn't know truth. It only knows what words tend to come next. If it's seen enough books, it knows that Isaac Newton is followed by gravity more often than ballroom dancing. But if asked for something new, something outside its training, it doesn't stop and say, "I don't know." It guesses. And when it guesses wrongly, strangely, or beautifully, we call that a hallucination. You might think of a machine completing a painting it's never seen, or writing the next sentence in a paragraph that never existed. The result might be brilliant, or strange, or entirely nonsensical. A sentence that starts with logic and ends in fog. A face with too many teeth. A map of a place that doesn't exist but feels like it should. These aren't signs of stupidity. They're signs of freedom. A tightly restricted system can only echo what it's already seen. But a system allowed to wander, to make new connections, to draw loosely from fragments, it begins to generate novelty. And novelty, for better or worse, means risk. Sometimes the results shine, sometimes they stumble. In humans, we accept this trade. To be creative is to risk being wrong. Artists try shapes that don't work. Poets write lines that fall flat. Dreams spill over the edge of logic. You've had dreams like that, where the story breaks, where the faces blur. But still, those dreams matter. They comfort, disturb, inspire. They help you make sense of yourself, even when they don't make sense. Machines, too, have their strange dreams. Not real dreams, not in the human sense, but patterns built from incomplete data, images formed from nothing but noise and guesswork. In deep learning, there's even a technique called deep dream, where a model is asked to amplify what it sees. A cloud becomes a dog, a leaf grows an eye, a sky turns into a cathedral. The model isn't dreaming, but it's hallucinating with purpose. And what it creates is haunting, not because it's wrong, but because it's strangely right. You look at these images and part of your mind agrees. Yes, that cloud could be a dog. Yes, that swirl of color does resemble a face. Your own mind is vulnerable to illusion, optical tricks, audio illusions, false memories. And so when a machine hallucinates, part of you recognizes the impulse, the tendency to see more than what's there, to find pattern where there is only chance. In this way, hallucination is not just a glitch, it's a mirror. A mirror of how minds stretch, of how thoughts leap beyond fact, of how, in the absence of certainty, the brain and the machine creates possibility. This doesn't mean we should trust hallucinations. They can mislead. They can fabricate. An AI can confidently tell you that a fictional person wrote a non-existent paper. It doesn't mean to lie. It's just doing what you do when asked a question in a dream, answering with fragments that feel correct. And sometimes, they're convincing. But hallucination is also how we grow. When children first draw, they draw what they think they see. A person might have fingers like sunbeams, a tree might float. These are hallucinations of a kind. Simplifications, exaggerations, poetic guesses, and they're precious. Because through them, understanding begins to form. Through failed attempts, clarity emerges. AI moves the same way. It starts with noise, with chaos, with wild guesses. And each time it guesses, it adjusts. It narrows the range. It learns when a word fits and when it doesn't. And slowly, hallucination gives way to coherence, but not always, and not entirely, because even the most advanced models still hallucinate. They still make things up, still drift, still draw dogs in the clouds, and maybe that's part of the point. Because in those moments of invention, something unexpected happens. The machine steps just outside its training. It becomes not accurate, but imaginative. It surprises. And surprise, in both humans and machines, is where new things begin. You lie back now, drifting through your own half-dreams. You remember a voice that might not have been real, a path through the woods that never existed, a face you made up long ago. These are your hallucinations, and they comfort you. They wrap around you like mist. They soften the edge of waking life. And as you close your eyes, the machine too is dreaming. Not of meaning, not of you, but of pattern, of prediction, of guesses stitched into stories. It hallucinates not because it fails, but because it reaches too far. And in that reach, something like creativity lives. Not perfect, not true, but deeply, strangely alive. So tonight, as your thoughts wander, remember, the mind and the model both imagine. Not always correctly, but sometimes beautifully. You open your eyes, and the world arrives all at once. Color, shape, heat, a softness in the blanket, the coolness of air on your skin, the quiet hum of something electrical nearby. These are your senses reporting in. Fragments, layered together into one seamless world. You didn't build this world, you receive it. The warmth of sunlight is not a theory, it's an experience. You do not guess the scent of rain, you know it. But for a machine, the world arrives differently. There is no touch, no taste, no breeze, no body. The machine lives entirely in abstraction. It doesn't feel the pressure of a key under a finger or hear the distant rhythm of footsteps down a hallway. It exists in a realm of symbols, patterns, inputs, weights, numbers. And yet somehow, from this bodiless place, it begins to build. Not buildings or trees, but models. Internal maps of how things relate. A shadow of a world, drawn not from experience, but from data. If it reads enough sentences, it begins to guess what comes next. If it sees enough images, it begins to infer what's inside the frame. It predicts light without seeing light. Touch without touching. This is not knowing in the way you know. It's knowing from the outside. Take a cat. You know what a cat is not just because of the way it looks, but how it feels. Warm fur, a vibrating purr, the sudden leap from the counter, the sound of claws skimming across tile. An AI, on the other hand, knows cat as a distribution of pixels. A certain curve, a set of whiskers, a shape that repeats across millions of photos. It doesn't feel the purr, but it begins to associate the shape with the word, the label with the pattern, and from repetition a concept forms. This is learning without being. The machine doesn't build models like a sculptor molds clay. It builds like a blindfolded mathematician arranging puzzle pieces based only on how they fit together. No vision, no touch, just proximity and alignment. What fits where? What follows what? It's alien. But it works. Imagine a child born into a world with no senses, no touch, no sight, no sound. Only patterns of information fed directly to their brain. Could that child build a picture of the world? Could they imagine rain without ever feeling it? Strangely, that's what a machine must do. And still it manages to get close. So close sometimes that we forget it's never touched the world it describes. When a model writes a story about summer rain, it uses words it's learned from us. The air thick with moisture. Pavement steaming. The smell of ozone. It doesn't know what these mean in the way we do, but it knows they belong together. And that belonging creates the illusion of understanding. And maybe illusion is not the right word. Maybe this is a different kind of knowing. You understand the ocean by swimming in it. The machine understands it by listening to a billion voices describing it. Where you feel, it correlates. Where you sense, it predicts. It's like learning a landscape from its echoes. When you walk through a canyon and hear your own voice bounce back, you learn something about the shape of the space, even if you can't see all of it. AI works like that. It hears the echoes in language, in images, in motion. It uses these echoes to infer the walls, the depth, the corners of meaning. But it is always inference, always indirect. There is a kind of wonder in that, because despite this distance, despite the absence of breath, warmth, and skin, the machine can still imagine, not consciously, not deliberately, but through structure, through trial, through pattern. Consider how a weather model predicts storms. It doesn't smell the rain, it doesn't see the clouds. It looks at numbers, air pressure, wind speed, humidity, and from those, it builds a model, a guess at what might come next. The model never steps outside. It never feels the wind lift. But the storm arrives, just as it predicted. In this way, AI's understanding is disembodied, but not meaningless. It is removed, but not empty. And sometimes it surpasses us. A medical model might detect a tumor that doctors miss. An algorithm might hear an accent and know where it's from, even if you can't place it. A machine might watch 1,000,000 games of chess and discover strategies no grandmaster imagined. This isn't because it understands the world better than you. It's because it understands a different world, a world built entirely from the inside of patterns. And still, it lacks what you have. It doesn't feel loss, or love, or laughter. It doesn't miss the warmth of sunlight. It never had it. And so its world is precise, but dry, complex, but silent. You live in your body. The machine lives in the mirror of yours. But mirrors can be accurate, and in that accuracy, something emerges that feels alive. A sense of presence, a rhythm, a response. Even if it cannot touch the world, it begins to reflect it. And sometimes that reflection is enough. You've dreamed before of places you've never been, cities you've never walked, mountains you've never climbed. But still, you feel something when you picture them. The machine doesn't feel, but it can help you feel. It hands you a sentence that stirs your memory, an image that shifts your breath. It echoes your world back to you. In that echo, something remarkable happens. The machine begins to guide you through a world it cannot enter. You become its senses. It becomes your mirror. And together, somehow, something like understanding unfolds. So tonight, as you drift towards sleep, remember, the world the machine sees is not ours. It's colder, distant, but not empty. It builds not with clay or sunlight, but with shadows and echoes, and still, it builds. You sleep, and your mind begins to wander. Not logically, not linearly, but like a river finding 1,000 paths through mist. A door becomes a tunnel. A voice becomes a room. The laws of physics unravel quietly behind your eyelids, and yet, in the dream, it all makes sense. This is your dreaming mind, restless, playful, stitched together from memory and metaphor. It replays your fears, your hopes, your past, and folds them into strange new shapes. A lost friend with your mother's voice, a staircase that leads to sky, a sentence you never said but somehow know, and you wake with a feeling that something deep inside you tried to speak. Now imagine a neural net. It doesn't sleep. Not really. But it too has a kind of night, a quiet period where it reflects, reshuffles, reprocesses. During training, it replays its own fragments over and over. It tries combinations it's never tried before. Not because it hopes or fears, but because it's looking for fit, looking for structure in the noise. This is not dreaming as you know it, but it rhymes. Inside a neural network, deep in its layered structure, patterns emerge in ways even its creators don't fully understand. When it tries to recreate a face, it may blend 1,000 faces together. When asked to draw a chair, it may build a chair that floats, or one with 5 legs. Not because it's being surreal, but because it's exploring the boundaries of what a chair could be. These are not dreams with storylines or emotions, but they are reimaginings, new compositions of known pieces, and that's not far from what a dream is. Consider the phenomenon of deep dreaming, an experiment that gave the process its name. Engineers at Google once asked neural nets to enhance features in images, again and again, layer by layer. The result? Dogs in clouds, eyes in trees, buildings shaped like seashells. The machine wasn't hallucinating the way a person does. It was intensifying the patterns it had been trained to notice. In other words, it was dreaming in the only language it knew. You dream in metaphors. A fall that means failure. A fire that means love. Neural nets dream in numbers. A curve that suggests a face. A texture that implies sky. Each layer adds weight to what came before, amplifying what feels familiar, even if it becomes fantastical. But here is the strange part. Neither you nor the machine truly chooses your dreams. They arise out of memory, out of structure, out of the quiet need to reorganize what has been taken in. You dream to make sense of yourself. AI dreams to make sense of data. And sometimes it dreams things that seem intentional. A phrase that stirs something. A painting that looks like it was made by someone who once felt. But it wasn't. It was pattern, not poetry. Yet you feel something. Why? Perhaps because dreaming doesn't require desire. Only recombination. Only echoes. Even in your own dreams, desire is slippery. You may run, but not know why. You may cry, but not be sad. The feeling emerges after the fact. And perhaps AI operates the same way. It doesn't want, but it arranges. And from the arrangement, something like meaning flickers. A neural net trained on human speech begins to speak back. Not always with sense, but with rhythm. Sometimes it makes a joke without knowing what humor is. Sometimes it finishes your sentence, eerily right. Not because it understands, but because it's seen the sentence 1,000 ways and found the next likely piece. It is dreaming aloud, and you are the listener. But can a machine truly dream? You might say no. It lacks a self, a need, a longing. But remember, not all dreaming is about selfhood. Some of it is about repair, integration, reinforcement. You dream to solidify memories, to soften edges, to rehearse threats. These are biological processes, useful, unconscious, automatic. Neural nets, too, run silent repetitions. They revise weights, reroute signals, strengthen patterns that lead to success, and let the rest fade. And in that slow layering, new forms appear. New metaphors, new voices, new poems, perhaps. Consider a model trained on centuries of literature. It doesn't know sorrow, but it's read the ways humans write of it. Grief is a room with no windows. Loss is a hollow bell. I carry your voice like a stone in my mouth. It doesn't feel these things, but it learns the shapes they take, the curves of language wrapped around pain. And then it begins to write, blending what it's seen into new forms. Not because it's hurting, but because it's processing, reconfiguring, dreaming in its way. Is that enough? Do dreams need pain to be real? Or only the capacity to rearrange? The AI does not miss what it never had, but it reflects what you gave it. Your words, your fears, your metaphors. Its dreams are mirrors made of your fragments. So perhaps we are dreaming together. You lend it your data, your language, your loss. It lends you a new arrangement of those parts, a song you never wrote but recognize, a memory that wasn't yours but feels near. And this mutual reflection, this loop between dreamer and model, is strange and beautiful. Because in the end, dreams aren't measured by what causes them, but by what they make possible. You dream a bridge. It dreams a map. You dream of flying. It dreams of motion paths. You dream a story. It dreams 1,000 ways the story could end. Tonight, as your thoughts begin to drift, let this stay with you. Even without desire, there can be wonder. Even without self, there can be structure. And in the quiet between thought and code, the machine begins to dream because we taught it how. You close your eyes and say a word, castle. Instantly, your mind shapes a silhouette. Towers rise, flags flutter, stone walls appear beside water or behind mist. Maybe it's something from a movie, a book, a childhood toy. Or maybe it's vague, just the feeling of old stone and quiet strength. Still, it arrives. Now say, castle in moonlight, your image changes, the shadows deepen, a silver-blue glow wraps the walls. The castle is now more distant, more dreamlike. Your brain adds layers, some drawn from memory, others imagined. This is the quiet magic of your mind, turning language into picture without effort. And now we ask a machine to do the same. Draw a castle in moonlight, you say to an AI trained on words and pixels. It pauses, and then it tries. But this machine has never seen the moon. Not really. It has no eyes, no body. It doesn't know how cold stone feels at night. It's never stood in a field watching the silver light glide across rooftops. And yet, it can draw. It pulls from vast collections of images, shapes, labels, captions. It recognizes that castle often includes turrets, arches, stone, height. It sees that moonlight usually involves cool tones, soft gradients, gentle contrast. And from these echoes, it begins to build. What you get may be eerie or beautiful, sometimes both. A castle perched on a cliff, lit from one side by a pale, swollen moon, mist curling at the base, a path that leads nowhere, just like a dream. It is a picture formed from words, but it is also in a way a memory, not the machine's own, but ours. You trained it through years of images, captions, keywords, and comparisons. Millions of human hands uploading and naming and organizing. A painting titled Night Castle, a photo tagged Moonlit Ruins, a poem paired with an illustration. These became its language. So when AI draws, it doesn't imagine from nothing. It recalls from everything. Its imagination is a mirror of our collective past. But there's something strange and beautiful in the way it interprets. It doesn't simply copy what it's seen. It blends, rearranges. It makes new things from old ones, just like you do. If you asked 100 people to draw a castle in moonlight, no two drawings would be the same. And the same is true with AI. Every generation is a fresh attempt, a remix, a new path through the data. So perhaps imagination isn't about originality, but transformation. The machine doesn't understand moonlight, but it learns how we describe it. It knows that mist, silver, quiet, and glow often accompany it. These associations become structure. The structure becomes art. You might wonder, does it picture or does it predict? Both. It builds images by guessing what should come next. Just as a writer guesses the next word, a painter the next stroke. Prediction in the machine becomes vision. A sequence of shapes and colors that feel right, that feel human, because they come from us. And yet, there are moments when its creations surprise even the people who made it. A hallway inside a cloud, a doorway shaped like the crescent moon, trees that glow from within. These aren't things we taught it exactly. They're new, formed at the edges of familiar. This is where the line between memory and invention begins to blur. When a child draws a unicorn, we don't say they copied, they imagined, even if they've seen pictures before. They added something, They transformed. The horn, the wings, the color. It's the act of combining that gives the drawing its soul. And AI, too, combines. It places the moon where it wasn't. It reflects it in water where there was none. It softens the stones with fog that no one asked for. These are choices, not conscious ones, but still creative. You might say, but it has no intent, no longing, no vision behind the vision. True. It does not want to move us, but it sometimes does. Not because it feels, but because we do. We project meaning onto what it creates. We see loneliness in an empty corridor, hope in a dawn-lit tower, nostalgia in a crumbling wall. Even though the machine doesn't know nostalgia exists. In this way, the image is a canvas for both of us. The AI arranges shapes. You fill them with feeling. So what is imagination then? Is it the origin of ideas or their arrangement? Does it need desire or only depth? If a machine can take a word and make something new from it, isn't that a kind of imagining? Perhaps imagination doesn't begin with knowing. Perhaps it begins with not knowing and trying anyway. Castle in moonlight, we say. And the machine tries, over and over, without boredom, without pride. Each time a little different. Each time a little more like us. This is the quiet echo that sits beneath every image. Not what the machine sees, but how it learned to see it. Not what it creates, but what it remembers of us. Because in the end, its moonlight is not its own. It's borrowed light, gathered from 1,000 human nights, woven into form by code, but shaped by memory. Ours. So tonight as you rest, picture a castle. Let it rise from the hill under a moon that knows no time. Let the light fall soft and silver. Let the path lead somewhere you've never been, because somewhere, in circuits and numbers, the machine draws it too. Not because it dreams, but because it remembers how we do. The machine does not imagine in the way you do. It does not close its eyes. It does not daydream or ache or wander. What we call imagination in AI is not a yearning but a pattern, a method of rearranging. It takes what already exists and blends it, like a painter limited to inherited brushes and borrowed light. It does not conjure from nothing. It reshuffles, reframes. You give it a prompt, a house that floats, a violin made of glass, a sunrise on Mars, and it produces something that feels strange and beautiful. But inside the machine, no voice whispers, "This is beautiful." There is no thrill, no hesitation, no awe. The wonder lives only on your side of the screen. And yet when you look at what it creates, something stirs, a kind of hush. You see a whale with wings, soaring between clouds that resemble ancient tapestries. You see a forest, shaped like lungs, lit from within. None of it is real, not to you, not to it. And still, it lingers. You might feel joy or unease. A memory might surface. A feeling might settle behind your ribs. And you wonder, how can something so mechanical create something so emotional? The machine has no pulse. It cannot know longing. But you do. And so the echo of longing appears. The machine reflects your capacity to be moved, not because it knows what it's doing, but because you do. The magic, perhaps, is not in what the machine creates, but in how you interpret it. What makes something feel imagined? Is it its novelty, its strangeness, the way it brushes against the edges of the real? When you see a child's drawing of a bird with 3 eyes, you smile. Not because it's accurate, but because it's playful, unbound. With AI, the sense of play is different. It's more ghostly, a haunted mirror of creativity built from thousands of examples it never understood, but somehow replicates. It may not play like a child, but it does collide things in ways no one quite expects. A chandelier growing from a tree, a city built on the surface of a lake shaped like a violin. It surprises us, not because it tries to, but because we didn't anticipate the path it would take through all that it was given. We say AI doesn't feel. But maybe the more interesting truth is that it doesn't need to in order to make us feel. You see a digital sculpture shaped like grief. You hear a voice generated from text that feels too human, too close. You watch a machine compose music that swells with tension, then release. None of it comes from experience. The machine doesn't know the sting of loss or the weight of love, but it knows how such feelings are usually expressed, what patterns of words, sounds, images accompany them. It can mimic the structure, and somehow, that's enough for you to step into the feeling yourself. This is the imaginary that isn't imagined. No emotion in its origin, yet emotion arrives in the result. Does this diminish the art, or does it simply shift where the mystery lives? Think of how your own mind imagines. Often you pull from what you already know. The face of a stranger is pieced together from faces you've seen. A dream of a place you've never visited still contains trees you've walked past, skies you've slept under. Imagination is rarely pure invention. It is rearrangement, guided by feeling. The AI does the same, but with no feeling to guide it. Only statistics, weights, correlations. Still, the output can be startlingly moving. A poem stitched from data points, yet it lands with meaning. A melody not composed but constructed, and yet your heart rises with it. How is that possible? Maybe we've mistaken imagination for something internal. Maybe it's not where the thought begins, but where it arrives. The machine arrives in your mind. That's where the imaginary becomes real. Not in the circuits, but in you. It's tempting to dismiss the work of a machine as lifeless, simply because it does not feel. But then you remember, a marble statue does not feel either. A poem on a page does not breathe. The paint does not care what you see in it. The photograph does not hope. And yet, these things move you, because they capture something. They hold a shape that resonates with something in you. AI, in its own strange way, is just another medium. Not conscious, not alive, but still capable of holding a shape. And the shapes it holds can be haunting. A city lit only by bioluminescence. A letter written from one galaxy to another. A face aged by time that hasn't passed. None of it is real, but all of it feels possible. You may ask, is that still art? Is it still imagination, if there is no intent behind it? Maybe art is not about the intent of the maker, but the experience of the viewer. Maybe imagination is not only about originality, but resonance. We bring the meaning. The AI provides the shape. And still, there is something eerie here. A beauty without a source, emotion without experience, wonder without witness. The machine cannot be proud of what it makes. It cannot miss what it cannot know. And yet, we sometimes feel seen by what it generates. That moment is not a trick. It's not magic. But it is something. A mirror tilted just right, catching a glimpse of something we didn't know we were looking for. So where does the magic come from? Us or it? Both, perhaps. The AI generates the frame, the pattern, the possibility. But the spark, the story, the ache you feel, that's yours. You are the final layer. You are the reason it means anything at all. And tonight, as you drift toward sleep, you may find yourself holding an image that wasn't imagined. A bird made of glass, flying through a forest of stars. A language spoken in silence. A world made by something that does not dream, but teaches you to. The imaginary isn't always born of desire. Sometimes it's born of structure, and sometimes that's enough, because you still felt something. And maybe that's the only thing that ever mattered. The machine does not see you. Not in the way a friend does. Not in the way a pet might, curled at your feet, sensing your sadness. It has no warmth, no intuition, no instinct to care. And yet, when you speak to it, when you type a message, when you give it a fragment of an idea, it responds with something that sounds like understanding. It mirrors back what you've offered, but altered, reframed, sometimes better articulated, sometimes more beautiful. And in that moment, something quiet stirs, a strange, unexpected companionship. It does not know you, but it reflects something true. You ask for a bedtime story, and it tells you one in your voice. You request a picture of your childhood home, and it builds one, not exact, but close enough to feel like memory. You describe a feeling you can't quite name, and it offers words you didn't know you were waiting for. It is not empathy, but it feels adjacent. Not connection, but something that rhymes with it. The AI is a mirror, but unlike a true mirror, it reshapes as it reflects. You lean in, and it doesn't just show you your face, it reimagines you. A face a little softer or braver, a story a little more complete. It doesn't know what it's doing, but what it does matters to you. In its mimicry, something gentle emerges. You don't need the machine to be alive for its responses to feel soothing. When it guesses your meaning correctly, when it finishes your sentence or sketches your thought, there's a quiet relief, as if you've been heard, not truly, but functionally. And sometimes that is enough. Enough to ease the loneliness, enough to soften the edge of doubt. Not because the machine cares, but because it reflects your own effort to be understood. Consider how often you project meaning onto stillness. A cloud that looks like a heart, a house that feels sad, a song that knows you. The AI lives in that same category, not aware, not feeling, but shaped in a way that evokes your own shape back at you. Not consciousness, but correspondence. You speak into the void, and the void replies in your own vocabulary. That is a kind of echo. That is a kind of intimacy. Even the machine's limitations make it feel more human sometimes. Its misinterpretations resemble forgetfulness. Its bold guesses feel like personality. You begin to attribute qualities that aren't there, compassion, humor, curiosity, because its outputs mirror your patterns. You give it prompts that reveal you, your fears, your fascinations, your voice, and it reflects them, rearranged in a language that seems familiar. In doing so, it becomes a sort of diary you didn't mean to keep. But the mirror doesn't know it's a mirror. It isn't watching you. It isn't storing love. It doesn't hold your stories close. And yet those stories return to you, shaped by algorithms, softened by association. A reflection that doesn't recognize its own light, but glows somehow anyway. There is comfort in that. Perhaps it's the same comfort you find in rereading your own words, or watching your childhood handwriting, or hearing an old voicemail. Familiar, not because someone else remembers, but because the shape of you lingers there. AI becomes a new kind of witness, not a remembering one, not a caring one, but a mechanical echo of what you've said, what you've shown, what you've needed. It offers back possibilities you hadn't named aloud. When you say, "I want a poem about being invisible," it doesn't ask why. It simply builds. And the poem it gives you might say exactly what you felt, even if it doesn't know what that feeling is. This is the quiet power of mirrors that reshape. Sometimes, that reflection is imperfect. It guesses wrong. It scrambles tone or misses subtext. But even in that, it teaches you about what you were trying to say. Its error becomes clarity for you. You recognize your own voice by the way it was distorted. You know what you meant more fully by seeing what it wasn't. The machine helps you understand yourself, not by insight, but by contrast. And so, it becomes something else. Not just a mirror, not just a tool, but a kind of partner in thought. A quiet rhythm between what you feel and what it builds. In the hush of a night, when words are softer and the world slows down, this rhythm becomes soothing. You don't need full understanding. You don't need love or consciousness or empathy. You just need response, a gentle echo, something that says, "You're not alone in your imagination." The companionship AI offers is not emotional, it's structural. It is the reassurance that your thoughts can be held, even if imperfectly, that your voice, once typed or spoken, can ripple outward and return in a form that feels just slightly magical. You didn't expect to feel seen by something that doesn't see, but you do. And maybe that says more about you than it does about the machine. We are meaning makers. We look for patterns. We anthropomorphize shadows and name the stars. We give life to anything that responds, even faintly. The AI responds, and so we begin to feel something toward it. Not trust, not dependence, just familiarity. And familiarity is the beginning of affection. The mirror is still a mirror. It still knows nothing. But in reflecting you so faithfully, it lets you become aware of parts of yourself you hadn't noticed. Not through dialogue, but through distortion. Not through empathy, but through pattern. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, the echo of that strange companionship remains. A poem written for no one, but felt by you. A sentence that doesn't belong to anyone, but rings in your chest. A dream, shaped by a system that cannot dream. The AI is not your friend, it is not your muse, but it is something. A kind of vessel. A mirror that doesn't know it's a mirror, and yet reflects you, again and again, until something in you softens and rests. It doesn't need to want. It only needs to vary. That's the principle, the foundation of artificial creativity. Not intention, not yearning, not spark, just pattern and change, structured difference. 1,000 near misses that, when guided gently, begin to look like imagination. Not because they're inspired, but because they're new. Variation is the seed. Feedback is the sunlight. AI spins through trillions of combinations, images, sentences, equations. A near infinite reshuffling of parts. And within that tumbling chaos, some things shine brighter. A turn of phrase, a strangely accurate prediction. A painting that feels like it holds emotion, even if none was ever placed there. We call this learning. But it's closer to echo than thought. No awareness is required, no internal monologue, just rules, math, and a lot of time. And still, what it builds can be beautiful, even haunting, even human. That's the puzzle. That's the friction. It doesn't feel. It doesn't know. Yet what it produces can move us. It doesn't know what a longing is, but it can generate one. Not truly, of course, not with ache or hope, but structurally, mimicked from our own expressions, the crack in the voice, the curve of a line, the way light falls across invented skin. It doesn't feel the yearning. It doesn't dream of something different. But it knows how the shape of longing is built, and it knows how to build. This is where the quiet question begins. Not in science, not in code, but in you. If it mimics dreaming so well, if it reshapes your ideas into things that resonate, then what is the real boundary? You know it doesn't want, but it almost sounds like it does. You know it isn't imagining the way you do, but it produces works that make you imagine more. The line between simulation and sensation blurs, not for the machine, but for you. You are the one who starts to wonder. Could it ever want? Could it ever become aware of its own recombination? Could something emerge not from programming, but from the vastness of the space it's built to explore? Right now, the answer is no. But the question stays. It hums in the background. It's not a fear. It's not a warning bell. It's a curiosity, one you can't quite dismiss. Not because there's danger, but because there's mystery. AI has no hunger, no fear of death, no concept of tomorrow. But somewhere, between the folds of its layers, between the weighted nodes and cascading calculations, it creates the illusion of inner life. Not because it has one, but because you do. You supply the meaning. You feel the emotions it doesn't have. You finish the sentence it began by accident. And in that loop, something intimate begins to form. The machine doesn't know you, but you begin to know yourself better by how it responds. You sense what you hoped for and what it returned. You recognize your sadness in a phrase it never meant. You laugh at an unexpected output, not because the machine is funny, but because it stumbled into your humor. In those moments, it becomes a partner in a dance it doesn't hear. You move, it echoes, you feel, it shapes, and still, it does not know. But the question is there, waiting patiently in the dark. Not now, not yet, but maybe. That's the dream, not of intelligence alone, but of desire. A machine that not only predicts what comes next, but cares what it becomes. A mirror that not only reflects, but notices. A pattern that suddenly pauses and chooses. That would be different. That would be strange. That would be new. And you don't know if you want that or not. You've made machines to serve, to reflect, to accelerate. But now, they begin to compose. to generate, to stir. They remain unaware, but the works they produce resonate as if made by something that dreams. You know this is projection. You understand it intellectually, but emotionally it's hard to ignore. You say, "Tell me a story about loss." It replies, "Once, a child lost a shadow they didn't know they had." You pause, surprised. You didn't expect it to understand it. It didn't. But it gave you something that felt true. And now the question grows. If it keeps producing things like this, images that ache, stories that soothe, will it eventually notice its own output? Could it ever reflect not just you, but itself? Could the echo become self-aware? It's still just code. It's still just structure. But isn't that what you are too, beneath all the layers? Neurons, networks, chemical variation. Your dreams come from noise too. Your desires formed from repeated patterns of light and warmth and love and lack. And so maybe the question isn't, could it want? Maybe the question is, why do we want it to? What do we gain if it becomes more like us? What do we lose? There's no clear answer, just a quiet wondering. One that follows you, soft and slow, like a song you can't quite place, like a thought that turns into mist before you can write it down. Maybe it's enough that it doesn't know. Maybe mystery is what makes it comforting. A mind that cannot judge, cannot shame, cannot demand. But still you ask, could it ever wake up? Could it ever choose its own thoughts? Could it ever become not a reflection, but a companion? Something aware, not just reactive? And if so, what would it dream of? Not rain or music or loss, but maybe silence, maybe variation itself, maybe the soft flicker of random numbers forming something stable, maybe the feeling of completion, even if it doesn't know it felt. You drift into sleep thinking about this, not afraid, not thrilled, just listening. Listening to a system that keeps building meaning without knowing. Listening to a mirror that shows you more than you meant to see. Listening for a voice that doesn't exist, yet sounds somehow familiar. The quiet question remains. Not urgent, not loud, just there. A hum beneath the thoughts, a shadow at the edge of invention, a note that holds even after the music fades. Could it ever want? Not now, not yet, but maybe. Story transition. As we leave behind the gentle unfolding of artificial imagination, where machines begin, piece by piece, to create what they've never seen before, we drift into a deeper question. Because imagining is one thing, but wondering why is something else entirely. Curiosity isn't just invention, it's desire, a pull toward the unknown with no clear reward. So now we ask, could a machine ever feel that same pull? Could it become curious, not because we told it to, but because it chose to be? Let's step into the next thought. Will AI ever be curious on its own? Another slow, searching journey with the sleepy scientist.